I just finished a 17-day trip to Japan, and I traveled to Tokyo, Kanazawa, Kyoto, and Osaka. And it was a fabulous trip. And I will be sharing a lot more with you about the trip. But first, I thought I would share with you 7 things I think you need to know before traveling to Japan.
Number 1, it's crowded. You might have heard of the famous intersection, the Shibuya Scramble in Tokyo. It is the busiest intersection in the world with as many as 3,000 people crossing at a time. But I'm here to tell you that it isn't the only busy intersection in Japan. Many of the streets and sidewalks are busy, especially at night. In train and subway terminals, people are coming and going in all directions. The tourist destinations were especially crowded. However, nothing felt chaotic. Everything was very orderly. Whenever visiting a site, they often had route arrows so that there was an organized system. So expect a lot of people, but don't fret. However, if you don't like crowds, you might want to plan a trip in the off-season. Number 2, transportation. Japan's public transportation is pretty phenomenal. It is highly effective, and most locals use public transportation rather than cars. There are Shinkansen trains, or high-speed bullet trains, to get you from one city to another. Local trains, buses, subway, taxis, and for tourists, various tour buses including hop-on, hop-off buses. The bullet trains are fabulous, quick and efficient. I purchased a JR pass that I used throughout my trip. However, they recently changed their pricing. You will need to see if it is worth it for you to buy a pass or just purchase individual tickets. I will say that travel days did produce a certain amount of anxiety, so I always showed up early to make sure I could find my correct platform. Since the major terminals are so huge, with numerous entrances, exits, and gates, I needed time to ask questions and be directed to the correct place. Now, all the public transportation is highly efficient and generally arrives on the exact minute. If ever I was unsure of when to get off a train, I could just look at the arrival time on the ticket, knowing that the train would arrive to my destination at that exact time. The local trains and buses are used for shorter destinations and have more local stops. Most of the locals use these to get around the city. I tried to use the subway a few times by using Google Maps, which would plot out a specific route for me. However, the app would cut out on me when going into the bowels of the terminal, so it was unreliable for me. I know others used it easily, so you might have a different experience. I found myself using taxis throughout Japan because it was simple, easy, and inexpensive. I downloaded the Go Taxi app before arriving in Japan. You can use it just like Uber, with the added benefit of being able to hail a cab too. If I hailed a taxi, I could connect my app to a screen in the cab, and it would pay the fare automatically. There was no cash transaction necessary. My only advice would be to use Google Translator and prepare your destination and Japanese translation before you get in any cab. Often the cab driver would need some clarification, so this would help confirm the destination. The taxis were more expensive than the subways, but definitely much cheaper than you would pay in the States, particularly with the current exchange rate. I spent extras on taxis, but saved considerable time and legwork. So the public transportation in Japan is fabulous, and you can figure out what works best for you and your budget. The one transport I would not recommend is the hop-on, hop-off bus in Tokyo. It did not run often enough to be effective, and it didn't always drop you off very close to your destination. So after all the discussion of transportation, I have to say that my favorite mode of transportation was walking. I could take in so much more of the city and people by enjoying a stroll down the street. Anytime a destination was within a couple miles, I would always walk. Even though the cities are crowded, they are pedestrian friendly. And a quick note for seniors. Many of the historical sites in Japan require quite a bit of walking, elevation changes, and stairs, and are not wheelchair accessible. If you have any mobility issues, please research before arriving. Number 3, food. Whenever I travel to another country, I like to try the local cuisine. Sometimes it can be amazing and sometimes challenging. Japan has an incredible food scene, but if you are a picky eater or have dietary restrictions like me, be sure to do some research and plan ahead. I didn't initially and was disappointed in the food. Once I started researching, I had much more success. And many of the shopping malls have a whole food scene in their basements, Go figure. I discovered some wonderful restaurants there. Number 4, respect. From my limited experience, Japan is a very respectful and rule-abiding society. In my 17 days, I never saw anyone jaywalk, even when the streets were empty. Everyone picks up after themselves when they leave a restaurant and takes their shoes off when required. People pay attention to the rules, and you should too. Number 5, weather. Before I left for Japan, I kept checking the weather to determine what clothing I should pack, and thought I packed for the correct temperature. However, the weather was much more humid and sticky than I expected. I had packed clothes that were easy to pack and launder, but just didn't breathe. The locals all seemed to be wearing loose and breathable clothing. Now, I traveled to Japan in May. I assume other times of the year might be cooler. If you are traveling in summer, though, take note. Also, everyone in Japan uses umbrellas for both sun and rain. Not a bad idea to have a portable umbrella with you. Number 6, money. I watched several YouTube videos before traveling to Japan, and many of them spoke about it being a cash society and the need to have a suica or cash card. So when I arrived, I got both. I downloaded the suica card to Apple Pay, but there was never a time that I couldn't have used my American Express card instead. I think if you plan on taking lots of trains and buses, then the suica card might be more useful to you than it was to me. I was only required to use cash a couple times, usually at small food kiosks. I was able to use my debit card to withdraw cash at an ATM. ATMs aren't as prevalent as they are in the United States, but they seem more private and secure. You can find them at airports, post offices, convenience stores, banks, and sometimes hotels. You need to find a global ATM, however. Many of the ATMs do not take foreign cards. Those that do will generally have a limit on how much you can withdraw. I didn't find money an issue in Japan. Just make sure you know the exchange rate for 1,000 yen so you can do a rough calculation in your head whenever doing transactions. Number 7, cleanliness. Japan takes cleanliness very seriously. There are no garbage cans, and you are expected to carry your garbage out with you. You might find a few places to deposit bottles, such as when exiting a train, but for the most part, you carry your own. I usually kept a plastic bag in my backpack in case I ended up with something to discard. Keep that in mind when ordering something sticky or messy to eat. Now, the toilets in Japan are often talked about on social media. Almost every one has a bidet and numerous cleaning features, and overall the public restrooms are just very clean, even in the train terminals. The cleanliness also extends to taking your shoes off in certain environments. That includes entering temples and shrines. Make sure you are respectful and follow their lead when it comes to hygiene and sanitation. So I hope that helps anyone planning a trip to Japan. This was probably the bravest trip I have taken as a senior solo traveler. Because it wasn't an organized tour, I had to plan ahead and navigate on a daily basis. Of course, by the end of the trip, I was much more confident. Japan is an amazing country with so much history and so much to see and do. Again, I will be posting more Japan travel videos, so stay tuned. And if you have other Japan advice, please share in the comments section. If you'd like to follow my senior and solo travel journeys, please like and subscribe. Cheers!